The afternoon sun was a pale yellow coin in the gray sky. Elias pushed through the thick, scratchy branches at the edge of the marsh. The town, a handful of rough wooden buildings, felt far behind him. He liked it that way. In the woods, no one called him stray or told him to get lost. Here he was just a boy looking for things to sell. His pockets were already half full. Some goosefoot leaves for old man Higgins's bad stomach. A handful of fat, orange mushrooms the cook at the boarding house would buy for stew. He kept his eyes on the damp ground, a skill he'd taught himself. You had to watch where you stepped. The marsh looked solid one moment and was a wet, sucking mouth the next. He was thinking about the coin the mushrooms might bring, maybe enough for a real piece of bread. Not just crusts when a sound cut through the quiet. It wasn't a bird or a rustling animal. It was a low, human groan, choked with mud and pain. Elias froze. Every story the men in the town told around the fire rushed into his head. Stories of wolves, of bears, of strangers who were not friendly. His first instinct was to run back the way he came, fast as a rabbit. Then the sound came again. And with it, a thick, wet, struggling noise. The sound of someone fighting and losing. His feet moved before his fear could stop them. He crept forward, careful, silent, pushing aside a curtain of long, damp grass. And there he saw her dot, in a small, muddy clearing that was more water than land. A woman was trapped. She wasn't young. Her face was lined with years and worry. Her clothes were of deer hide, stained dark with mud. She was native, one of the people from the distant mountains the town spoke about in harsh, afraid whispers. Her right leg was bent under her at a bad angle, and she was sunk past her waist in what looked like ordinary mud. But Elias knew better. It was quicksand. He'd seen a mule get caught in it once. The more it fought, the faster it sank. She wasn't fighting wildly anymore. She was tired. Her arms were stretched out, her hands gripping at nothing but air. Her dark hair was matted with sweat and bog water. But her eyes, when they lifted and met his from across the pit, they weren't begging. They were clear and sharp, like flint. They held a calm kind of defeat, but no fear. Elias's heart hammered against his ribs. The right thing, the town thing, would be to turn around. To tell the sheriff. But the sheriff would likely come with a rope and a rifle, not to help. The woman saw him, a dirty white boy peering from the reeds. She closed her eyes for a second, as if expecting a rock to be thrown. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He looked around, his mind clicking fast. There was a fallen pine tree nearby, an old giant rotting at the base. A long, thin branch, mostly dry, stuck out from it. He scrambled over and with all his weight broke it off with a loud crack. The woman's eyes snapped open. He approached the edge of the firm ground, testing the earth with his foot before putting his weight on it. He lay flat on his stomach, the cold mud seeping through his thin shirt, and shoved the branch out toward her. "Grab it," he said, his voice sounding small and squeaky in the big quiet of the marsh. She stared at the branch, then at him, suspicion warring with a desperate hope. Slowly, her muddy hand reached out and closed around the wood. Her grip was weak. "Hold on. Don't let go," Elias said. He braced his feet against a tree root and pulled. The branch bent. She didn't move. He pulled harder, his arms burning. He let out a grunt, pulling with everything he had in his skinny body. For a terrible moment, nothing happened. Then, with a thick sucking sound, the mud let go a little. He scrambled back, dragging her an inch, then another dot. It took a long time. He would pull, rest panting, then pull again. His hands blistered. His muscles screamed, but he kept pulling inch by terrible inch until her upper body was on the solid ground. She tried to help, clawing at the grass with her free hand. But her bad leg was useless. Finally, with one last huge effort, he dragged her clear of the hungry bog. They both lay there, gasping, covered in brown slime. The woman shivered violently, from cold, from pain, from shock. Elias got to his knees. He couldn't leave her here. She couldn't walk. If the quicksand didn't take her again, the cold of the night would. Or an animal. He looked toward the town, then back at her. He made his decision. "My place," he mumbled, not sure if she understood. "It's close." It was the hardest thing he had ever done. He got her to sit up, and to stand on her one good leg, leaning all her weight on him. He was small for 12, and she was not a small woman. They stumbled through the woods like a broken three-legged creature, moving painfully slowly. Every step was agony for her, a white-knuckled grip on his shoulder. Every step was a burning strain for him, his legs trembling. By the time they reached his shack, hidden in a thick copse of trees, they were both crying silently from exhaustion. He kicked the door open and helped her collapse onto his pile of old blankets in the corner. He quickly lit the small stove, the room filling with a thin, welcome warmth. He brought her water in a tin cup, which she drank greedily. He looked at her leg. It was swollen and had a deep, ugly cut. He went to his secret stash, a cracked jar, where he kept his foraged medicines. He mixed some powdered yarrow root and a little spiderweb to help stop the bleeding, making a paste with clean water. Gently as he could, he applied it to the wound and wrapped it with a strip of cleanish cloth torn from his other shirt. She watched him work, her breathing starting to slow. Her sharp eyes moved around his poor, bare shack, then settled back on him. They were different now. The flint was still there, but the suspicion was gone, replaced by a deep, searching look. Her gaze dropped to his chest. Hanging from a leather string around his neck was the only thing he owned from before. A small piece of wood, carved by someone into the shape of a bird in flight. He'd had it forever. The woman's eyes went wide. A sharp breath hissed between her teeth. She reached out a trembling, muddy finger and pointed at the bird. Then she looked into his face, her own face a storm of shock and a dawning, impossible recognition. Her lips moved. A single, rough, whispered word came out. A word that meant nothing to Elias, but that carried the weight of a whole world he had lost. Then her eyes rolled back, and she fell into a deep, feverish sleep, leaving the boy alone with a rescued stranger and a single, mysterious word hanging in the quiet, dusty air. The woman slept for a long time. Elias sat on the dirt floor, his back against the wall, watching her. The word she had said buzzed in his head like a trapped fly. It was a sound he had never heard before, but it felt heavy, like it meant something important. He kept the shack dark, only a little light coming through the cracks in the walls. He knew he had to be careful. If anyone from town saw smoke from his chimney for too long, they might come sniffing around. He waited until full dark, then slipped out to the town well, filling his water bucket when no one was looking. He took a cold potato from the bin behind the cookhouse, a risk that made his heart pound. When he got back, she was awake. Her eyes were open, watching the door as he came in. She didn't look scared anymore, just tired and watchful. He held out the potato and the water. She took them and nodded slowly, a thank you. She ate in small, careful bites, her eyes never leaving him. Elias, he said, pointing to himself. It was the name the town had given him. It never really felt like his. The woman thought for a moment. She touched her own chest. Ayana, she said, her voice rough but clear. She pointed to him, a question in her eyes. Elias, he said again. She shook her head slowly, not in a mean way, but like she knew it was wrong. She pointed again at the little bird pendant around his neck. She said a different word this time, softer. He couldn't repeat it. It got stuck in his mouth. They started talking in a broken way. She knew a little of the town's language, and he learned words from hers. Water was Mini-ai. Fire was Peta. She pointed to his eyes, then hers. "I exta," she said. He said it back. She almost smiled. For 2 days, it was like this. He would sneak out for food and listen to the town. He would come back and tend to her leg. The paste was working. The swelling was going down. They shared the little food he could find, and the quiet shack didn't feel so empty anymore. On the 3rd morning, he came back from checking rabbit snares to find her sitting up. She had found a stick in the woodpile and was using it to draw in the dirt. Floor by her blankets, she motioned for him to come close. In the dirt, she drew a circle with some smaller shapes around it. A village. Then, with quick, angry lines, she drew horses and stick figures with guns coming from the east. Raiding it. He'd heard stories of this, but from the other side stories of attacks on settlers. He'd never seen it drawn from this side. From the circle being broken, her finger pointed to one of the small shapes in the circle. A tiny circle. A child. Then her finger moved, tracing a line away from the village, following one of the raiders' horses. The child was taken. She looked at him, her eyes deep and sad. She pointed her finger at her own chest, and at the tiny circle in the dirt. Her child. Elias's stomach felt cold. He understood. Her child was stolen long ago. Then Ayana did something new. She pointed to the bird pendant on his chest. She leaned forward and carefully touched one of the beads on her own worn moccasin. The pattern there, a line of tiny, crisscrossed stitches, was exactly the same as the pattern carved into the wing of his wooden bird. A shiver went through Elias, a feeling like missing a step on the stairs. She pointed back and forth from the bead to his pendant. Same. Family. Then she pointed to the drawing of the stolen child. Then, slowly, she pointed at him. The room went very still. The only sound was the crackle of the fire in the stove. Elias stared at the drawing, at the line leading away from the ruined village. He looked at her face, which was now wet with silent tears. He thought of his own life in the town. No memory of parents. No one who looked like him. Just a nameless boy with a wooden bird. No, he whispered, but it wasn't a refusal. It was fear. It was too big to think about. Just then, the sound of voices broke the silence. Men's voices, coming from the path that led to town. They were getting closer. Elias jumped up and ran to the window, peeking through a crack. It was the sheriff and 2 other men, their boots crunching on the dry leaves. They were walking with purpose, looking around. One of them pointed toward the marsh. "Tracked her this far," the sheriff was saying, his voice a low rumble. "Injured, likely. Can't have gotten far. We find her, we deal with the problem. No hostiles near our town." Elias ducked down, his blood turning to ice. They were looking for her. They weren't coming to help a hurt person. They were coming to deal with the problem. He crawled back to Ayana. Her face was set in stone again, the flint back in her eyes. She had heard. She understood the word hostile. She motioned for her stick, for the knife Elias used for cutting plants. He shook his head, panic rising in his throat. There were 3 armed men. She couldn't even walk. Fighting meant dying. The men's voices were right outside now. "Check that old shack," the sheriff said. "Stray boy lives there. Might have seen something." A heavy fist pounded on the door. "Boy, you in there?" Elias looked at Ayana, at the drawing in the dirt of the stolen child. He looked at the door, which shook with another pound. He had to choose. Right now. And he didn't know who he was choosing for the orphan Elias. or the stolen child in the dirt with the bird. Around his neck, the pounding on the door felt like it was punching right into Elias's chest. He held his breath. Ayana's hand tightened around the stick. Her eyes were locked on his, asking a silent question. "Boy, I know you're in there. Open up." It was the sheriff's voice, rough and impatient. Elias's mind was a trap, snapping shut with fear. Then he looked at Ayana's leg, wrapped in his old shirt. He looked at the drawing in the dirt. Without a sound, he moved. He grabbed the blanket from his own pallet and threw it over Ayana and the drawing, covering her almost completely in the shadowy corner. He scooped up a little dry dirt and dusted it over the top, making it look like a heap of old rags. He put a broken crate in front of it. Just as the door latch started to rattle, he pulled the door open, blinking like he'd just woken up. The sheriff stood there, big and broad, blocking the gray light. 2 other men from the town stood behind him, their eyes peering past Elias into the shack. The room felt tiny with them in it. "Took your time," the sheriff grunted, stepping inside without being asked. His boots were heavy on the floor. His eyes scanned the room, the cold stove, the empty shelves, the pile of rags in the corner. "I was sleeping," Elias mumbled, looking at his own bare feet. "You see anything strange out by the marsh?" One of the other men asked. He was a lean man with a nervous look. "Signs of someone? An injured person?" Elias made himself look confused. "Person? No, sir. Just been checking my snares. Got a rabbit yesterday." He gestured to a bare hook on the wall where no rabbit hung. The sheriff wasn't listening. He was walking slowly around the small space. He stopped near the stove, touching the metal. It was cold. Elias was glad. Now he'd let the fire die. The sheriff's gaze landed on the pile of blankets. He took a step toward it. Elias's heart hammered so loud he was sure they could hear it. He had to do something. "I heard a noise last night," Elias said suddenly, his voice too high. All the men turned to him. Out past the big pine. Sounded like something big moving through the water. Scared me. I bolted my door. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "An animal?" "Maybe," Elias said, shrugging, trying to look small and stupid. "Could have been." It was dark. The lean man shifted. Could have been her, trying to cross the creek. The sheriff stared at the blanket pile for one more long second. Then he turned away. "We're searching the whole area. You stay inside, boy. Don't go wandering. If you see anything, a stranger, any sign at all, you run and tell me. You understand? It's not safe." Elias nodded fast. "Yes, sir." The men filed out. The sheriff paused in the doorway. "It's for the good of the town," he said, not unkindly, but like he was explaining something to a dog. "We can't have trouble. We deal with it quick so everyone can sleep at night." Then they were gone, their footsteps fading. Elias stood frozen until he couldn't hear them anymore. Then he rushed to the door, sliding the weak bolt across. He leaned against the wood, his whole body shaking. He waited a full minute before going to the corner. He pulled the blanket away. Ayana was there, her face pale, but her jaw set. She let out a long, slow breath. She understood. The men were hunters, and she was the prey. For the rest of the day, a thick silence filled the shack. The easy feeling from before was gone, shattered by the sheriff's knock. They were no longer just a boy and a hurt woman. They were 2 people hiding from a whole town. Elias felt torn right down the middle. One part of him was the boy who lived in this shack, who fetched things for the townsfolk, who knew every inch of these woods. That boy knew the rules. You listened to the sheriff. You stayed with your own. You survived, but the other part was new and raw. It was the part that saw the drawing in the dirt, that heard the word Ayana whispered, that felt a strange, deep pull toward the songs she hummed under her breath, songs that felt like a half-remembered dream. That part didn't feel like it belonged to the town at all. As dusk fell, he finally spoke, his voice quiet. They're coming back. At first light, they'll search wider. They'll find this place properly. Ayano looked at him. She pointed to the mountains he could see through the cracks in the west wall. They were a dark blue shape against the sunset sky. She made a walking motion with her fingers, then pointed to her bad leg and shook her head. She was saying her people were there, but she could not get to them. Then she pointed at him and made the walking motion again. She pointed to the mountains, then back to him. You go. No, Elias said, the word coming out sharp. He wasn't sure why he refused so fast. Was it because it was dangerous? Or was it because if he left, he'd be choosing her story over his own? She saw his conflict. She didn't push. Instead, she patted the ground beside her. Slowly, he sat. She picked up her stick. In the dirt, she didn't draw a story this time. She drew a picture. A bird, like the one on his pendant, but with its wings spread in flight. Under it, she drew a line, like a path. At the end of the path, she drew the same bird, sitting on a branch next to another, bigger bird. She pointed to the little bird at the start of the path. Then she pointed to him. She pointed to the little bird at the end, next to the big bird. Then she pointed to herself and back to him. Asterisk, you are lost. You can come home. Asterisk tears pricked hot at the back of Elias's eyes. He blinked them away angrily. He had never cried, not even when he was little and the other kids threw stones. He wouldn't start now. Ayana reached out, not touching his face, but gently touching the wooden bird on his chest. Her touch was warm and sure. She hummed a few notes of a lullaby, so soft it was almost just a breath. And in that moment, the war inside Elias ended. The sheriff's words, the good of the town, meant nothing. The town had never been good to him. This woman, this stranger he pulled from the mud, saw him. She saw the bird. She saw the child in the dirt. She offered a path, not an order. He looked at her, and for the first time, he didn't see just a hurt woman, or a native, or a problem. He saw a person who had lost everything, just like he had. Maybe she was even... He couldn't finish the thought. It was too big. But he knew what he had to do. When it's full dark, he whispered, his voice firm now. We go to the mountains. Ayana searched his face. She saw the fear, but she saw the decision underneath it. She nodded once, a slow, deep nod of understanding. The hunt would begin at dawn. Their only chance was to move in the dark. The deepest dark, just before the moon rose, was their only cover. Elias moved quickly, his hands trembling not from cold, but from a sharp, clear fear. He tore his last semi-clean shirt into long strips. He helped Ayana sit up, and with her guiding his hands, they bound her injured leg tightly from her knee down to her ankle. It wasn't a fix, but it would hold the bones still. Her face was pale and slick with sweat when they finished, but she gave a stiff nod. He packed what little they had. The last of the water in a skin, the few bits of dried meat he'd been saving, his small knife. He looked around the shack, the only home he'd ever known. It felt smaller now, and empty in a way it never had before. He was leaving it for good, and the thought made his stomach flip. Ready? He whispered .aiiana, took the sturdy walking stick he'd found for her. Using it and his shoulder, she pushed herself up to stand. A low groan escaped her lips, swallowed by the dark. She was breathing hard already. This was going to be impossible. They slipped out the door into the cool night. The woods were a world of black shapes and whispers. Every rustle was a posse member. Every snap of a twig was a boot. Elias knew these trails, but in the dark, with her leaning heavily on him, every step was a struggle. They moved like ghosts, but slow, noisy ghosts. Her good leg was strong, but the pain from the other was a live thing. She had to stop often, leaning against a tree, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Elias tried to lead them away from the known paths, through thicker brush where they'd leave less of a trail. Thorns caught their clothes. Unseen branches slapped their faces. Progress was agonizingly slow. The moon began to rise, a sliver of cold light that made the shadows deeper and more dangerous dot after what felt like hours. They reached the creek. It wasn't wide, but the water was fast and loud over the rocks. It was the boundary between the town's wooded hills and the steeper, wilder country that led to the mountains. On the other side, the land tilted upwards. "We cross here," Elias said, his voice low. "The water will hide our tracks." Ayanna looked at the rushing water, then at her leg. Crossing meant getting it soaked, meant slippery rocks, meant more pain. But she nodded. It was the only way. He went first, testing each stone. The water was icy, biting right through his worn shoes. He turned and held out his hand. She took it, her grip like iron. Step by careful step, they moved into the current. The water pushed hard against them. Halfway across, her bound foot slipped on a mossy rock. She cried out, a short, sharp sound, and fell into the water, pulling Elias down with her. The cold was a shock. He came up sputtering, gripping her arm. They floundered, the current trying to pull them downstream. For a terrifying moment, he thought they were lost. Then his feet found purchase. He dragged them both, stumbling and soaked, to the far bank. They collapsed on the stony shore, shivering violently, the sound of the creek mocking them. They were wet, cold, and making too much noise. And they were now on the wrong side of the creek, with the first hints of gray light touching the eastern sky. Dawn was coming. They had to keep moving. Elias pulled her up again. Her teeth were chattering, and her whole body shook with cold and pain. They started up the slope, leaving a wet, obvious trail behind them. The land grew rockier, the trees thinner. They had no cover. The sun broke over the horizon, a blood-red line. And with the light came the sound they dreaded. A dog's bark, sharp and excited, echoed from the woods behind them. Then a man's shout, distant but clear. Here, tracks leading to the creek. The posse had found their trail. And they had dogs. Panic, cold and final, shot through Elias. He looked at Ayanna. Her face was a mask of exhausted defeat. They couldn't outrun dogs. They couldn't even walk properly. "Go," she said, the word clear in the morning air. She pushed at his shoulder. "Run. Taxa go." It was the word she'd taught him for leave. He stared at her. She was pointing up the mountain, urging him to save himself. This was it. This was the choice. He could melt into the rocks, maybe escape. He could go back to being Elias the orphan, alone. He looked at the men appearing at the tree line across the creek, 3 of them, with the sheriff in front. He saw the dogs straining on their ropes. He looked at Ayanna, standing straight now, facing them, her walking stick held like a weapon. She was preparing to make a stand, to give him time. The memory of the cold shack, the empty shelves, the scornful voices of the town flashed in his mind. Then he saw the bird carving. He heard her hummed song. He did not run. Instead, he stepped forward. He placed himself directly in front of her, between her and the armed men now splashing across the creek. His heart was a drum in his ears, but his legs felt solid under him. The sheriff and the others reached their bank, their clothes wet to the knees. The dogs sniffed and growled. "Step aside, boy," the sheriff ordered, his rifle held loosely but ready. "This doesn't concern you." Elias didn't move. He felt Ayana's hand on his back, not pulling him away, just resting there. He took a deep, shaking breath. Then he did something he had never done in front of the town. He spoke up. He lifted the wooden bird pendant from his chest, holding it out so it caught the morning light. He looked straight at the sheriff, and with a voice that didn't waver, he shouted the words Ayana had taught him. "Asterisk Ina." "Asterisk," he cried. "Mother." Then he pointed to himself. "Asterisk Zaye." Asterisk son. The word hung in the air, strange and powerful. The men stopped. The sheriff's confident scowl faltered, replaced by confusion. He looked from the fierce, wounded woman to the dirty, defiant boy holding the crude toy. This wasn't a hostile and a stray. This was something else. Something the sheriff's simple rules didn't have an answer for. One of the other men raised his rifle, aiming past Elias. "She's a savage, boy." "She's fooled you." "Lower that rifle." The sheriff barked, his eyes still locked on Elias's face, seeing the truth there that no lie could mimic Dot in that frozen moment. As the armed men hesitated, a new sound came. Not from behind Elias, but from the rocks above them. A low whistle, like a bird, but not a bird. Everyone looked up. On the ridge above them, silhouetted against the brightening sky, stood 5 figures. They were on horseback, silent as statues. They were Ayana's people. They had found her, or she had found them. Their bows were drawn, arrows pointed at the men by the creek. The standoff was complete. The posse with their guns and dogs. The warriors on the ridge with their bows. And in the middle, a boy and a woman holding their ground. The world seemed to stop. The only sounds were the rush of the creek and the low growl of the dogs. Elias stood frozen, his heart hammering against his ribs. He could see the sheriff's face, caught between anger and a dawning, uncomfortable understanding. The man with the raised rifle slowly, shakily lowered his weapon. Ayana's hand tightened on Elias's shoulder. She called out, her voice strong and clear now, cutting through the tension. She spoke in her own language, words that flowed like the water over stones, directed at the warriors on the ridge. Then she spoke in broken words the sheriff could understand, pointing to her leg, to Elias, to the town across the creek. She was not yelling. She was explaining. "He pulled me from the deep mud," she said, each word chosen carefully. "This boy, he gave me shelter. He is not of your people. He is." She hesitated, her voice catching. She looked at Elias, and her eyes filled with a pain and a joy so deep it was hard to look at. "He is my son, stolen from me when the leaves were green many summers past." The sheriff flinched as if struck. He looked at Elias, really looked at him, not as a stray, but as a person. He saw the boy's tangled hair, his thin frame, the fierce protectiveness in his stance. He saw the crude bird around his neck. The story was impossible, and yet, standing here in the cool morning light, it felt more true than anything. One of the warriors on the ridge, an older man with a face like weathered wood, nudged his horse forward a few steps. He spoke, his voice a low rumble. Ayana listened, then translated, her eyes on the sheriff. "He says you stand on hunting grounds that are not yours. He says the boy has made his choice. He asks if you will make more widows and orphans today over a mother and a child." The sheriff's shoulders slumped. The fight went out of him like air from a punctured bellows. He glanced back at his 2 men, who looked more scared and confused than brave. He looked at the drawn bows, then back at the pair by the water, the wounded woman standing tall, and the orphan boy who had just declared himself her son. "No," the sheriff said, the word heavy with defeat and a strange kind of shame. "No more fighting today." He raised his empty hand, palm out toward the ridge. A sign of peace, or at least a sign of stopping. The boy. If that's his choice, he can go. He turned his gaze to Elias. It wasn't friendly, but the hardness was gone. You understand? You go with them, you don't come back. That life is over. Elias nodded. He did understand. It was the easiest decision he had ever made. The sheriff jerked his head at his men, and they began to back away, carefully, across the creek. The dogs whined, pulled back on their ropes. In moments, they had disappeared into the trees on the other side, leaving only the fading sound of their retreat. Silence returned, deeper now. The warriors on the ridge lowered their bows. The older man dismounted and walked down the slope toward them. His eyes were on Ayanna, filled with a deep relief. They spoke softly. Then the man's eyes turned to Elias. They were sharp, intelligent, missing nothing. They studied his face, his stance, the bird around his neck. Ayanna spoke softly to Elias. He is my brother. You're Lexi. The man, Elias's Lexi, approached. He didn't smile, but his eyes were not unkind. He reached out and gently lifted the wooden bird pendant. He examined the carving, his thumb rubbing over the familiar pattern on the wing. He looked from the pendant to Elias's face and gave a single, slow nod. It was a confirmation dot, then he did something unexpected. He placed his hand firmly on top of Elias's head, a strong, steady pressure. It wasn't a pat. It was a claiming, a welcome. Tears, which Elias had fought back for so long, finally spilled over. They were quiet tears of relief, of fear, of a loss he was only just beginning to feel, and of a hope so new it was terrifying. Ayanna's brother helped her onto his horse, then turned to Elias. He pointed to another warrior, a younger one who gestured for Elias to come up behind him. For a moment, Elias hesitated. He looked back across the creek, toward the woo.